Hey everyone, welcome to the Latent Space podcast. This is Alessio, partner and CTO in residence at Decibel Partners, and I'm joined by my co-host Swix, founder of Small AI.
Hi, and today we are in the studio with David Hsu from Retool. Welcome.
Thanks, excited to be here.
We like to give a little bit of intro from what little we can get about you, and then have you talk about something personal. You got your degree in philosophy and CS from Oxford. I wasn't aware that they did like double degrees. Is that what you thought?
It's actually a single degree, actually, which is really cool. So basically, you study content, you study philosophy, you study the intersection. The intersection is basically AI, actually, and sort of can computers think, or can computers be smart? Like, what does it mean for a computer to be smart? As well as logic, which is also another intersection, which is really fun too. So.
In Stanford, it might be symbolic systems or whatever, and it's always hard to classify these things when we don't really have a word for it. Now I guess everything's just called AI. 5 years ago, you launched Retool. You were in YC 17, Winter 17, and it's just been a straight line up from there, right?
I wished.
What's something that's, and that's your sort of brief bio that I think you want most people to know. What's something on your LinkedIn that people should know about you, maybe on the personal hobby or, let's just say something you're very passionate about that might not be about Retool?
I read quite a bit. I probably read like 2 books a week around about. So it's a lot of fun. I love biking. It's also quite a bit of fun. So yeah.
Do you use Retool to read? Like what the hell?
No, I don't use Retool to read. No, that'd be funny.
What do you read? How do you choose what you read? Any recommendations that's like, that you just fall in love with?
It's pretty diverse. I'm mostly reading fiction nowadays. So fiction's a lot of fun. I think it maybe helps to be more empathetic, if you will. I think it's a lot of fun actually to sort of see what it's, like to be in someone else's shoes. So that's a lot of fun. So I thought I'd read a good amount of philosophy as well. I find philosophy just so interesting, especially logic. We can talk more about that for probably hours if you want. So.
Yeah, I have a sort of casual interest in epistemology, and I think that anytime you try to think about machine learning on a philosophical angle, you have to start wrestling with these like very fundamental questions about how do you know what you know.
Yeah, totally. What does it mean to know?
What does it mean to know? Yeah. All right. So over to you.
That's its own podcast. We should do a special edition about it. But that's fun. Let's just maybe jump through a couple things on Retool that I found out while researching your background. So at demo day, you did YC, but you didn't present at demo day initially because you were too embarrassed of what you had built. Can you maybe give any learnings to like founders on like jumping back from that? I've seen a lot of people kind of like give up early on because they were like, oh, this isn't really what I thought it was going to be a founder. They told me I would go to YC and then present and then raise a bunch of money and then everything was going to be easy. So how did that influence also how you build Retool today, in terms of like picking ideas and like deciding when to give up on it?
Yeah, let's see. So this is around about 2017 or so. So we were supposed to present at the March demo day, but then we basically felt like we had nothing really going on. We had no traction, we had no customers. And so we were like, okay, well, why don't we, take 6 months to go find all that before presenting? Part of that, to be honest, was I think there's a lot of noise around demo day, around startups in general, especially because there's so many startups nowadays. And I guess for me, I'd always wanted to sort of underpromise and overdeliver, if you will. And in demo day, I mean, maybe you two have seen a lot of the videos. Like it's a lot of honestly overpromising and under-delivering, because every startup says, oh, I'm going to be the next Google or something, and then you peer under and you're like, wow, nothing's going on here, basically. So I really didn't want that, and so. We chose actually not to present the demo day, mostly because we felt like we didn't have anything substantial underneath. Although actually a few other founders in our batch probably would have, chosen to present in the situation, but we were just, kind of embarrassed about it. And so we basically took 6 months to just say, okay, well, how do we get customers? And we're not presenting until we have, a product that we're proud of and customers that we're proud of. And fortunately it worked out. 6 months later, we did have that. So I don't know if there's much to learn from the situation besides I think social validation was something that I personally had never really been that interested in. And so it was definitely hard because it's hard to sort of, it's almost like you go to college and all your friends are graduating when you failed or something. You failed your final and you have to like redo it here. And it's like, well, it kind of sucks that all your friends are up there and on the podium, presenting, and they are raising a ton of money and you're kind of being left behind. But in our case, we felt like it was a choice. And we could have presented if we really wanted to, but we would not have been proud of the outcome or proud of what we were presenting. And for us, it was more important to be true to ourselves, if you will, and show something that we're actually proud of, rather than just raise some money and then shut the company down in 2 years. So.
Yeah. Any Sam Altman stories from the YC days? Could you tell in 2017 that Sam was going to become run the biggest AI company in the world?
Wow, no one's asked me that before. Let me think. Sam was, I think he was, I forgot, I think maybe president of YC in our batch. We actually were in his group actually at the very beginning. And then we got moved to a different group. I don't honestly have, I think Sam was clearly very ambitious when we first met him. I think he was very helpful and sort of wanted to help founders. But besides that, I think we were so overwhelmed by the fact that we had to go build a startup that we were not honestly paying that much attention to every YC partner and taking notes on them. So.
That makes sense. Cool. And then just to wrap some of the Retool history nuggets, you raised a Series A when you were at 1 million of revenue with only 3 or 4 people. How did you make that happen? Any learnings on keeping teams small? I think there's a lot of overhiring we've seen over the last few years. I think a lot of AI startups now are kind of like raising very large rounds and maybe don't know what to do with the capital. So,
yeah. So this is kind of similar actually from sort of why we chose not to present a demo day. And the reason was, it feels like a lot of people are really playing startup. I think PG has an essay about this, which is like, you're almost like playing house or something like that. Like, it's like, oh, well, I hear that in a startup, you're supposed to raise money and then hire people. And so therefore you go and do that. And you're supposed to, do a lot of PR because that's what, startup founders do. And so you could do a lot of PR and stuff like that. And for us, we always thought that the point of starting a startup is basically you have to create value for customers. If you're not creating value for customers, like everything else is nothing's going to work basically. You can't, continuously raise money or hire people. If you don't have customers, you don't have to deliver value for them. And so for us, we were always very focused on that. And so that's initially where we started. And I think it's, again, maybe goes to like the sort of, presenting something truthful about yourself or staying true to yourself, is something to that effect, which is we didn't want to pretend like we had a, thriving business. We didn't actually. And so the only way to not pretend was actually to build a thriving business. And so, we basically just, put our heads down and, grinded away for probably a year and a half or so, just writing code, talking to customers. And I think that at that point we had raised something like maybe $1 million, maybe $1.5 million coming out of YC. So, to us, to people, that was a huge amount of money. I was like, wow, like how are you ever going to spend $1.5 million? Our runway was like, 5-6 years at that point, right? Because we're paying ourselves 30-40K a year. And so then the question was not like, oh, we're going to run out of runways. The question was like, we better find traction, because if we don't find traction, we're going to just give up psychologically. Because, we're grinding on it. If you grind on an idea for 4 years, nothing happens, you're probably psychologically going to give up. And I think that's actually true in most startups. Actually, it's like most startups die in the early stages, not because you run out of money, but really because you run out of motivation. And for us, had we hired people, I think it would have actually been harder for us, because we would have ran out of motivation faster. Because when you're pre-product market fit, actually trying to lead a team of like 10 people, for example, to march towards product market fit, I think it's actually pretty hard. Like it's every day people are asking you, so why are we doing this? And you're like, I don't know, man. Like, hey, trust me. And that's actually a very tiring environment to be in. Whereas if it's just like the founders figuring out product market fit, I think that's actually a much sort of safer path, if you will. You're also screwing less with employees. Like when you hire employees, you have an idea, you have front of market, you have customers. That's actually, I think, a lot more stable of a place for employees to join as well. So,
yeah, and I find that typically the sort of founder-employee relationship is, employee expects the founder to just tell them what to do, and you don't really get critical pushback from the employee, even if they're bought in, even if they like you as an early engineer. It's very much like the role play of like, once you have that founder hat on, you think differently, you act differently, and you're more scrappy, I guess, in trying to figure out what that product is. As I really resonate with this because I'm going through this right now.
That's awesome. One thing we did actually early on that I think has paid a lot of dividends, especially Retool's a lot larger now, is we hired a lot of former founders. So I want to say like when we were, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 people, we were probably like half former founders at each one of those stages. And that was actually pretty cool because I think you infuse sort of a, get things done kind of culture, a outcome-oriented culture of like very little politics, because, no one came from larger companies. Everyone was just like, this is my own startup. Let me go figure out how to achieve the best outcome for the customer. And so I think from a cultural perspective, even today, a lot of Retool's culture is sort of very self-startery. I think it's actually because of sort of these like, early founders that we hired, which was really, really, we're really lucky to have had them. So.
Yeah. And then closing off on just a little bit of the fundraising stuff. Something notable that you did was when in 2021, when it was the sort of peak ZERP and everyone was raising hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, you intentionally raised less money at lower valuations is your title. And I think it's a testament to your just overall general philosophy in building Retool that you're just very efficient and you do things from first principles. Like any updates on like, would you still endorse that? Would you recommend that to everyone else? What are your feelings sort of 2 years on from that?
Yeah. So at a high level, so exactly what you said is correct. We raised less money at a lower valuation. And I think the funny thing about this is that when we first announced that, even, internally and both externally, I think people were really surprised actually, because, I think Silicon Valley has been conditioned to think, raising a giant sum of money at a giant valuation is a really good thing. So like, you should maximize both the numbers basically. But actually maximizing both the numbers is actually really bad actually for the people that matter the most, i.e. your employees or your team. And the reason for that is, raising more money means more dilution. So if you look at, a company like, let's say Uber, for example, if you join Uber at like, I don't know, like a $10 billion valuation, let's say you joined before their huge round, which I think happened at a few $1 billion in valuation, you actually got diluted a ton when Uber fundraises. So if Uber raises, if Uber dilutes themselves by 10%, for example, let's say they raise 500 to 5 billion, for example, every employee's stake goes down by 10% in terms of ownership. Same with previous investors, same with the founders, etc. And so if you look at actually a lot of founders in sort of the operations logistics space, or those that fundraise like 2013, 2017. A lot of the founders by IPO only have a few percentage points actually for a company. And if founders only have a few percentage points, you can imagine how little employees have. And so that I think is actually just a really, bad thing for employees overall. Secondly, it's a sort of higher valuation given the same company quality is always worse. So basically what that means is if you are fundraising as a company, you could command a certain valuation in the market. Let's say it's, X, for example. Maybe you get lucky and you can raise 2 times X, for example. But if you choose 2 times X, your company itself has not fundamentally changed. It's just that, for some reason, investors want to pay more for it. Maybe today you're an AI company, for example. And so investors are really excited about AI and will pay more for it. However, that might not be true in a year or 2 years' time, actually. And if that's not true in 2 years' time, then you're in big trouble, actually. And so now I think you see a lot of companies that raised really high valuations about 2021. And now they're like, man, we're at like 100x, or, we raised a 300x multiple, for example. And if we're at 300x then, maybe now we're at like 200x. And like, man, we just can't raise money ever again. Like, we're going to have to grow like 50x to go raise money, at a reasonable valuation, let's say. And so I think that is really challenging and really demotivating for the team. And so I think a lower valuation actually is much better. And so for us, in retrospect, to answer the question, 2 years later, we did not predict, the crash, if you will. But given it, I think we've done extremely well, mostly because our valuation is now sky high. So the valuation we're sky high. I think we'd have a lot more problems. We'd probably have recruiting problems, for example. We'd probably have a lot of internal morale problems, et cetera. People would be like, why is the valuation this way? We might have cash flow problems because we might have to go raise money again, et cetera. But we can't because the valuation is too high. So I would urge, I think, founders today to quote unquote, like leave money on the table. Like there's some things that are not really worth optimizing. I think you should optimize for the quality of the company that you build, not like the valuation you raise that or the amount you raise, et cetera. So.
In hindsight 2020, but it looks like you made the right call there anyway. So maybe we should also, for people who are not clued into Retool, do a quick what is Retool? I see you as the kings or the inventors of the low code internal tooling category. Would you agree with that statement? How do you usually explain Retool?
I generally say it's like Legos for code. We actually hate the low code moniker. We actually never use it. In fact, we have docs saying we will never use it internally, or even to customers. And the reason for that is I think low code sounds very not developer-y. And developers, they hear the phrase low code, are like, oh, that's not for me. Like, I love writing code. Like, why would I ever want to write less code? And so for us, Retool's actually built for developers. Like 95% of our customers actually are developers, actually. And so that is a little bit surprising to people. How I generally explain it is, and this is kind of a funny joke too. I think part of the reason why Retool has been successful is that developers hate building internal tools. And you can probably see why. I mean, if you're a developer, you probably build internal tools yourself. Like, it's not a super exciting thing to do. It's like piecing together a CRUD UI. You probably, pieced together many CRUD UIs in your life before. And there's a lot of grunt work involved. It's like, hey, state management. It's like, data validation. It's like displaying error messages, like bouncing buttons. Like all these things are not really exciting. But you have to do it because it's so important for your business to have high quality internal software. And so what Retool does is basically allows you to sort of piece together an internal app really fast, whether it's a front end, whether it's a back end or whatever else. So yeah, that's what Retool is.
Yeah, actually, so you started hiring, and so I do a lot of developer relations and community building work, and you hired Kritika, who has now moved on to OpenAI, to start out your sort of DevRel function. And I was like, what is Retool doing courting developers? And then she told me about this, developer traction. And I think that is the first thing that people should know which is that like actually the burden and weight of internal tooling often falls to developers, or it's an Excel sheet somewhere or whatever. But yeah, you guys have, you've basically created this market. In my mind, I don't know if there's someone clearly before you in this, but you've clearly taken over and dominated. Every month, YC, there's a new YC startup launching with that. It's like, we're the, open source Retool. We're like the lower code Retool, whatever. It's pretty, I guess it's endearing, we'll talk about Airplane later on, but, I think, that I've actually used Retool, in my previous startups, for this exact purpose. Like, we needed a UI for, AWS RDS that they can, like the rest of our, less technical people, like our sales operations people could interact with. And Retool is perfect for that.
Yeah, it's a good example of like, that's a, application that an engineer probably does not want to build. Like building an app on top of Salesforce or something like that is not exciting. It's so API sucks. It's rate limited. It's like not a fun experience at all. But piecing it together in Retool is, quite a bit easier. So yeah, let me know if you have any feedback, but awesome. Thanks for using it.
Yeah, no, of course. So, like more recently, I think about 3-4 months ago, you launched Retool AI. Obviously AI has been sort of in the air. I'd love for you to tell the journey of, sort of AI products ideation within Retool. Given that you have a degree in this thing, I'm sure you're not new to this, but like when would you consider sort of the start of the AI product thinking in Retool?
Yeah, wow, it's funny. So we actually had a joke internally at Retool. Our product roadmap for every year, I think it was like 2019 or something. We had this joke, which was like, what are we going to build this year? We're going to build AI pair programming, is what we always said as a joke. And so, but it was funny because we were like, that's never going to happen. But like, let's add it because it's like a buzzwordy thing that enterprises love. So let's like add it. And so it was almost like a funny thing, basically. But it turns out, we're actually building that now. So this is pretty cool. So I would say maybe AI thinking at Retool probably first started maybe like, I would say maybe a year and a half ago, something like that. And the evolution of our thinking was basically when we first started thinking about it, sort of in a philosophical way, if you will. It's like, well, what is the purpose of AI, and how can it help? What Retool does. And there were two sort of main prongs, if you will, of value we got. One was helping people build apps faster. And so you've probably seen like Copilot, you've seen sort of so many other coding assistants, like Dev, stuff like that. So that's interesting, because, engineers, as we talked about, do some grunt work, and, the grunt work, maybe could be automated by AI was sort of the idea. And it's interesting. So we actually, I would say kind of proved or disproved the hypothesis a little bit. If you talk to most engineers today, like a lot of engineers do use Copilot. But if you ask them like, how much time does Copilot save you? It's not like coding is 10x faster than before. Coding is maybe like 10% faster, maybe 20% faster, something like that, basically. And so it's not like a huge step change, actually. And the reason for that is, we think, is because the sort of fundamental frameworks and languages have not changed. And so if you're building, let's say, like the sales ops tool you were talking about before, for example, let's say you've got AI to generate you a first version of that, for example. The problem is that it probably generated it for you in like JavaScript, because you're writing for the web browser, for example, right? And then for you to actually go proofread that JavaScript, for you to go read the JavaScript to make sure it's working, to fix like subtle bugs that AI might have caused, hallucinations, stuff like that, actually takes a long time and a lot of work. And so for us, the problem is actually not like the process of coding itself. It is more sort of the language or the framework we think is like way too low level. It's kind of like, if you think about like punched cards, like, let's say back in the day, you just like punch cards, and AI could help you generate punched cards. You're like, okay, I guess that helps me, punching cards is a little bit faster now because I have a machine punching them for me. But like when there's a bug, I still have to go read all the punched cards and figure out what's wrong, right? It's like still a lot of work, actually. And so for us, that was the sort of initial idea, was, can we help engineers code faster? That would, I think it's somewhat helpful, to be clear. Like, again, I think it's 10 or 20%. So we have things like, you can generate SQL queries via AI, you can generate UIs via AI and stuff like that. So that's cool, to be clear. But it's not, I think, the step change of programming that we all wanted. And so that, I think, is, we're investing somewhat in that. But the bulk of investment actually is in number 2, which is helping developers build AI-enabled applications faster. And the reason why we think this is so exciting is we think that practically every app, every internal app especially, is going to be AI infused over the next like 3 years. And so every tool you might imagine, so like the tool you were even mentioning, like a sales operations tool, for example, probably, if you were to build it today, you want to incorporate some form of AI. And so, we see today, like for us, like a lot of people build, let's say sales management tools at Retool. An example is there's a Fortune like 500 companies building like sales forecasting tools. So they basically have salespeople enter their forecast, for the quarter, at the beginning of every quarter. Like, hey, I have these deals, and these deals are going to close. These deals are not going to close. I think I'm upside in these, downside in these, stuff like that, basically. And what they're doing now is they're actually, so you can imagine just pulling in deals from your Salesforce database. And so it pulls in the deals and it actually uses AI to compute, like, okay, well, given previous deal dynamics, like these are the deals that are more likely to close this month versus next month versus this quarter, next quarter, et cetera. And so it could actually, pre-write you a draft of, your report, basically. And so that's an example where I think all apps, whether it's, a sales app, internal, let's say fraud app, a, fintech app, whatever it is, basically, especially internal apps, I think, like you said, Alessio, in order to make people more productive, it's going to incorporate some form of AI. And so then the question is, can we help them incorporate this AI faster? And so that's why we launched like a vector database, for example, built directly into Retool. That's why we, launches all these AI actions. So you don't have to, go figure out what the best model is and do testing and stuff like that. We'll just, give it to you out of the box. So for us, I think that is really the really exciting future is, can we make every app, mostly Retool, use AI a little bit and make people a lot more productive? So.
We talked with Jeffrey Wang, who's the co-founder and chief architect of Amplitude. He mentioned they just use Postgres vector. When you were building Retool vectors, how do you think about leveraging a startup to do it, putting vectors into one of the existing data stores that you already had? I think like you already have quite large customer scale, so like you're maybe not trying to get too cute with it. Any learnings and tips from that?
Yeah, I think that generally the philosophical thing I think we believe is we think the open source movement in AI, especially when it comes to all the supporting infrastructure, is going to win. And the reason for that is we look at like developer tools in general, especially such a fast moving space. In the end, like there are really smart people in the world that have really good ideas, and they're going to go build companies and they're going to go build projects basically around these ideas. And so for us, we have always wanted to partner with maybe more open source kind of providers or projects, you could say, like PG Factor, for example. And the reason for that is it's easy for us to see what's going on under the hood. A lot of this stuff is moving very fast. So sometimes there are bugs, actually. And so we can give it go look and fix bugs ourselves. So we can contribute back to them, for example. But we really think open source is going to win in this space. It's hard to say about models. I don't know about models necessarily because, it starts getting pretty complicated there. But when it comes to tooling, for sure, I think there's just like so much. There's an explosion of creativity, if you will. And I think betting on any one commercial company is pretty risky. But betting on the open source sort of community and the open source contributors, I think is a pretty good bet. So that's why we decided to get PG Factors.
Is there any most underrated feature, like something that customers maybe love that you didn't expect them to really care about? I know you have a like text to SQL, you have UI generation. There's like so many things in there. What surprised you?
Yeah, so what's really cool, and this is my sense of the AI space overall, curious to get your takes from you too as well, is that especially in Silicon Valley where a lot of the innovation is happening, I think there's actually not that many AI use cases, to be honest. And AI to me, even as of January 19th, 19th of 2024, still feels like in search of truly good use cases. And what's really interesting though about Retool, and I think we're in a really fortunate position, is that we have this large base of sort of customers, and a lot of these customers are actually much more legacy, if you will, customers. And a lot of them actually have a lot of use cases for AI. And so to us, I think we're almost in like a really perfect or unique spot. We're able to adopt some of these technologies and then provide them to some of these like older players. So one example that actually really shocked and surprised me about AI was so we have this one let's say clothing manufacturer. I think it's either the first or second largest clothing manufacturer in the world who's using Retool, and they're an enormous company with very multinational. Stores on pretty every mall in the world, and they were interested in. So they have one problem, which is they need to design styles every year for the next year, basically for every season. So like, hey, here's like summer 2024, for example, and what are we going to design? And so what they used to do before is they would hire designers, and designers would go study data. They'd be like, okay, well, it looks like maybe floral patterns are really hot in California, for example, in 2023. And do I think it's going to be hot in 2024? Well, let me think about it. I don't know. So let me maybe, and if so, if I believe it is going to be hot, let me go design some floral patterns actually. And what they ended up doing in Retool actually is they actually automated a lot of this process away in Retool. So they actually now built a Retool app that allows actually a non-designer, so like an analyst, if you will, to go analyze who are the hottest selling patterns, particular geos. So this was really hot in Brazil, this was really hot in China, this was really hot, somewhere else basically. And then they actually feed it into an AI, and the AI, actually generates with DALL-E and other image generation APIs, actually generates patterns for them, and they print the patterns, which is really cool. And so that's an example of honestly, a use case I would have never thought about. Thinking about how clothing manufacturers create their next line of clothing, for the next season. I don't know. I never thought about it, to be honest. Nor did I ever think, how it would actually happen. And the fact that they were able to leverage AI to actually, leverage multiple things in Retool to make that happen, is really, really, really cool. And so that's an example where I think if you go deeper into if you go outside of Silicon Valley, there are actually a lot of use cases for AI, but a lot of this is not obvious. You have to get into the businesses themselves. And so I think we personally are in a really fortunate place. But if you're working in the AI space and want to find some use cases, please come talk to us. We're really excited about marrying sort of technology with use cases, which I think is actually really hard to do right now. So So.
I have a bunch of sort of standing presentations around how this industry is developing, and I think the foundation model layer is understood. The sort of LangChain, VectorDB, RAG layer is understood. And I always have a big question mark, and actually have you and Vercel V0 in that box, which is sort of the UI layer for AI. And you are perfectly placed to expose those functionalities to end users, even if you personally don't really know what they're going to use it for. And sometimes they'll surprise you with their creativity. One segment of this, I do see some startups springing up to do this, is related to the things to something that you also build, but it's not strictly AI related, which is Retool workflows, which is the sort of canvasy boxes and arrows, point and click, do this, then do that type of thing, which every I hate that what are we calling low code? Let's every internal tooling company eventually builds. I worked at a sort of workflow orchestration company before, and we were also discussing internally how to make that happen. But you're obviously very well positioned to that. Basically, do you think that there is an overlap between Retool workflows and AI? I think that there's a lot of interest in sort of chaining AI steps together? Do people? I couldn't tell if like that is already enabled within Retool workflows. I don't think so. But you could sort of hook them together sort of jankily. Is there like what's the interest there? Is it all of a kind ultimately in your mind?
It is 100% time. And yes, you could actually already, so a lot of people actually are building AI workflows now in Retool, which is, we're going to talk more about it in a second. But a hot take here is actually, I think a lot of the utility in AI today, I would probably argue 60-70% of the utility, businesses have found in AI is mostly via ChatGPT, and across the world too. And the reason for that is, I think the ChatGPT sort of, UI, you could say, or interface or user experience is just really quite good. You can sort of converse, with an AI basically. But that said, there are downsides to it. If you talk to a giant company like a JP Chase, for example, they may be reticent to have people copy paste data into ChatGPT, for example, even on ChatGPT Enterprise, for example. Some problems are that I think chat is good for one-off tasks. So if you're like, hey, I want a first version representation or something like that, and help me write this first version of a doc or something like that. Chat is great for that. Right? It's a great, very portable, if you will, form factor. So you can do that. However, if you think about it, you think about sort of economic productivity more generally, like chat, again, will help you like 10 or 20%, but it's unlikely that you're going to replace an employee with chat. You're not going to be like, oh, I have a relationship manager at JP Chase, and I've replaced them with an AI chatbot. It's kind of hard to imagine, right? Because the employee's actually doing a lot of things besides generating. Maybe another way of putting it is chat is like a reactive interface. It's like when you have an issue, you'll go reach out to chat, and chat might solve it. But chat is not going to solve 100% of your problems. It'll solve 25% of your problems pretty quickly, right? And so, what we think the next big breakthrough in AI is actually automation. It's not just oh, I have a problem, let me go to a chatbot and solve it. Because again, people don't spend 40 hours a week in a chatbot. They spend maybe 2 hours a week in a chatbot, for example. And so what we think can be really big actually is you're able to automate entire processes via AI. Because then you're really realizing the potential of AI. It's not just a human copy pasting data into an AI chatbot and pasting it back out or copying back out. Instead, it's the whole process now is actually done in an automated fashion without the human. And that, I think, is what's going to really unlock sort of economic productivity, or that's what we're really excited about. And I think part of the problem right now is, I'm sure you all have thought a lot about agents, is that I think agents are actually quite hard. Because the AI is wrong 2% of the time, but then you if you let's say raise to the power 7, for example, that's actually wrong quite often, for example. And so what we've actually done with workflows is we've learned actually is that we don't want to generate the whole workflow for you via AI. Instead, what we want you to do actually is we want you to actually sort of drag and drop the workflow yourself. Maybe you can get a V0 or something via AI, but it's coded basically. You should actually be able to modify the steps yourself. But every step can use AI. And so what that means is it's not the whole workflow is created by AI. Instead, every step is AI automated. And so if you go back to, for example, the use case I was talking about, with a clothing manufacturer, that's actually a workflow actually. So basically what they say is hey, every day we ETL the data, from our sales systems into our database, and then we, do some data analysis, and that's just raw SQL basically. It's nothing too surprising. And then they use AI to go generate the new ideas. And then the analysts will look at the new ideas to approve or reject them, basically. And that is that's true automation. It's not just a designer copy pasting things at a ChatGPT and be like, hey, give me a design. It's actually designs are being generated. They generate 10,000 designs every day. And then you have to go and approve or reject those designs, which I think is a lot, that's a lot more economically productive than just copy pasting stuff in ChatGPT. So we think sort of the AI workflow space is a really exciting space. And I think that is the next step in sort of delivering a lot of business value via AI. I personally don't think it's via chat or via agents quite yet. So,
yeah, I think that's a pretty reasonable take. It's disconcerting because disconcerting only in the fact that I know a lot of people trying to build what you already have in workflows. And so you have that sort of, you're the incumbent sort of in their minds. I'm sure it doesn't feel that way to you, but like, I'm sure you're the incumbent in their minds, and they're like, okay, like, like how do I compete with Retool, or differentiate from Retool. And as you mentioned, all these sort of connections, and it does remind me that you're running up against Zapier, you're running up against maybe Notion in the distant future. And yeah, I think that there'll be a lot of different takes at this space, and like whoever is best positioned to serve their customer in the way that they sort of need to shape is going to win. Do you have a philosophy around like what you won't build? Like what do you prefer to partner and not build in-house? Because I feel like you build a lot in-house.
Yes, there's probably two philosophical things. So one is that we're developer first. And I think that's actually one big differentiator between like us and Zapier. Notion, we're actually very rare to see them actually. And the reason is we're developer first. Because developers, like, if you're like building a sales ops tool, you're probably not considering Notion if you're a developer. You're probably like, I want to build this by React basically, or use Retool. And so, we build for developers? It's pretty interesting actually. I think one huge advantage of some of the developers is that they actually don't developers don't want to be given an end solution. They want to be given the building blocks so they can themselves go build the end solution. And so for us, like, interesting point that Equilibrium Retool can get to is basically you could say, hey, Retool's a consulting company, and we basically build apps for everybody, for example. And what's interesting is that we've actually never gone to that Equilibrium, and the reason for that is with some of the developers. Developers don't want, like a consultant coming in and building all the apps for them. Developers are like, hey, I want to do everything myself. Just give me the building blocks. Give me the best table library. Give me good state management. Give me an easy way to query REST APIs, and I'll do it myself basically. So that I think is pretty. So we generally end up basically always building blocks that are reusable by multiple customers. We have, I think, basically never built anything specific for one customer. So that's one thing that's interesting. A second thing is when it comes to sort of, let's say like in the AI space, what we're going to build and what we're not going to build, we basically think about whether it's a core competency or whether there are unique advantages to us building it or not. And so if we think about the workflows product, we think workflows actually is a pretty core competency for us. And I think the idea that we can build a developer first workflows automation engine, it's actually, there's nothing, I think after we released, workflows to workflows, there have been a sort of few copycats that are, I think, quite far behind. Actually, they sort of are missing a lot of, I think, more critical features. But like, if you look at the space, it's like Zapier on one side, and then maybe like Airflow on the other. And so Retool Workflows actually is fairly differentiated. And so we're like, okay, we should go build that basically. There's no one else to build it, so let's go build it. Whereas if you look at like vectors, for example, you look at vectors like, wow, this is a pretty thriving space already if vector databases. Does it make sense for us to go build our own? Like, what's the benefit? Like, not much. We should go partner with or go find technology off the shelf. In our case, it's pgvector. And so for us, I think it's like, how much value does it add for customers? Do we have a different take on the space? Do we not? And in every product that we've launched, we've had a different take on the space. And the products that we don't have a different take, we just adopt what's off the shelf.
Let's jump into the State of AI survey that you ran and maybe get some live updates. So you surveyed about 1,600 people last August. So, in AI world, this basically like 5 years ago. And there were kind of like a lot of interesting nuggets, and we'll just run through everything. The first one is more than half the people, 52%, said that AI is overrated. Are you seeing sentiment shift in your customers or like the people that you talk to, like as the months go by, or do you still see a lot of people, that are not in Silicon Valley maybe say, hey, this is maybe not as world changing as you all made it sound to be?
Yeah, so actually we're on the survey again, actually in the next few months, so I can let you know when it changes. It seems to me that it has settled down a bit in terms of sort of the, maybe like, signal to noise, you could say. Like, it seems like there's a little bit less noise than before, but the signal's actually around about the same in the sense that, like, I think people are still trying to look for use cases. I'm saying with August of last year, like, United States again, and I think there are slightly more use cases, but still not substantially more. And I think, as far as we can tell, a lot of the engineers surveys, especially some of the comments that we saw, do feel like the companies are investing quite a bit in AI, and they're not sure where it's going to go yet. But they're like, right, it could be big, so I think we should keep on investing. I do think that based on what we are hearing from customers, if we're not seeing returns in like a year or something, there will be more skepticism. So I think there is like it is time bound, if you will. So.
Yeah. You finally gave us some numbers on Stack Overflow usage. I think that's been a Twitter meme for a while, whether or not ChatGPT kills Stack Overflow. In the survey, 58 people said they used it less, and 94% of them said they used it less because of Copilot and ChatGPT, which, I think it kind of makes sense. I know Stack Overflow tried to pull a whole thing. It's like, no, the traffic is going down because we changed the way we instrument our website, but I don't think anybody bought that. And then you had right after that expectation of job impact by function, and operations people, 8 out of 10 basically, they think AI is gonna really impact their job. Designers were the lowest one, 6.8 out of 10, but then all the examples you gave were designers of job being impacted by AI. Do you think there's a bit of a dissonance maybe between like the human perception of like, oh, my job is like can possibly be automated? It's funny that the operations people are like, yeah, it makes sense. I wish I could automate myself, versus the designers, or maybe they love their craft more. I don't know if you have any thoughts on who will accept it first, that they should just embrace the technology and change the way they work.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's probably going to be engineering driven. I mean, I think you two are very well, maybe you two even started some of this wave, sort of the AI engineer wave. I think the companies that adopt AI the best, it is going to be engineering driven, I think, rather than like operations driven or anything else. And the reason for that is I think the rise of this like profile of like an AI engineer, like AI is very, maybe it's kind of philosophical, like AI is a tool in my head. Like it is not in my head, I think we're actually pretty far from AGI, although we'll see, what happens. But AI is not like a, thing that it's not like a black box where like it does everything you want it to do. The models that we have today require like very specific prompting, for example, in order to get like, really good results. And the reason for that is it's a tool that, you could use it in specific ways. If you use it the wrong way, it's not going to produce good results for you, actually. It's not like, going to, by itself take your job away, right? And so I think actually, to adopt AI, it's probably going to have to be engineering first, basically, where engineers are playing around with it, figuring out the limitations of the models, figuring out like, oh, maybe like using vectorized databases is a lot better, for example. Maybe like prompting in this particular way is going to be a lot better, et cetera. And that's not the kind of stuff that I think like an operations team is going to really be like experimenting with necessarily. I think it really has to be engineering led. And then I think the question is, well, what are they just going to focus on first? Like I think they focus on design first or like operations first. And that I think is more of a business decision. I think it's probably going to be more like, the CEO, for example, said, hey, we're having trouble scaling this one function. So like, why don't we try using AI for that? And let's see what happens, for example. And so in our case, for example, we have a lot of support issues. And what I mean by that is we have a really, really high performing support team, but we get a lot of tickets. And the reason for that is, we're a very dynamic product. You can use it in so many different ways. And so we'll have a lot of questions for us, basically. And so, we were looking at, can we, for example, draft some replies and support tickets, via AI, for example? Can we allow our support agents to be, hopefully, doubly productive as before, for example? And so I guess I would say it's like, business needs driven, but then engineering driven after that. So like, the business decides, okay, well, this is where AI could be most applied. And then we assign the project to an engineer and the engineer goes and figures it out. I honestly am not sure if like the operation are going to have much of a, like if they accept or reject it, I don't know if that's going to change the outcome, if you will. So.
Yeah. Interesting. Another interesting part was the importance of AI in hiring. 45% of companies said they made their interviews more difficult in the engineering side, made interviews more difficult to compensate for people using Copilot and ChatGPT. Has that changed at Retool? Like, have you thought about it? I don't know how much you're still involved with engineering hiring at the company, but I'm curious how we're scaling difficulty of interviews, even though the job is the same, right? So just because you're going to use AI doesn't mean the interview should be harder, but I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, for us, I think our sense basically of the survey, and this is true for what we believe too, is that we are most, when we do engineering interviews, we are most interested in assessing like critical thinking or thinking, on the spot. And I guess when you're hiring an employee, in the end, the job of the employee is to be productive. And this is what our tools they want to be productive. So, that's kind of our thinking too. However, we do think that, if you think about it from a first principles way, If your only method of like coding is literally copy pasting, off of ChatGPT or like, just pressing tab in Copilot, I think that would be concerning. And so for that reason, we still do want to test for like, fundamentals understanding of comp sci. Now that said, I think if you're able to use ChatGPT or Copilot, let's say competently, we do that as a plus. We don't view it as a minus. But if you only use Copilot and you aren't able to reason about, like, how to write a for loop, for example, or how to write FizzBuzz, that would be highly problematic. And so, for us, what we do today is we basically screen share, or we actually use a hackpad actually. So it's, so I guess there's no Copilot there. You can sort of see what they're doing or see what they're thinking. And we really want to test for thinking, basically. But yeah, I mean, we ourselves internally have embraced Copilot, and we would encourage engineers to go embrace Copilot too. But we do want to test for understanding of what you're doing rather than just copy pasting on Copilot. So
the other one was AI adoption rate. Only 27% are in production. Of that 27%, 66% are internal use cases. Shout out to Retool. How do you have a mental model as to how people are going to make the jump from like using it internally to externally? Obviously, there's like all these different things like privacy, like if an internal tool hallucinates, that's fine because you're paying people to use it basically, versus if it hallucinates to your customer, there's a different bar. I don't know if you have thought about it, because for you, if people build internal tool with Retool, they're external customers to you, so I think you're on the flip side of it.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say. Maybe a core Retool belief is actually that most software built in the world is internal facing, actually, which actually may sound kind of surprising, first time you're hearing this, but effectively, like, we all work in Silicon Valley, right? Like, we all work at businesses basically that sell software as sort of as business. And that's why all the software engineers that we hire basically work on external facing software, which makes sense because we're software companies. But if you look at most companies in the world, are actually not software companies. If you look at like, the clothing manufacturer that I was talking about, they're not a software company. Like, they don't sell software to make money. They sell clothing to make money. And most companies in the world are not software companies, actually. And so most of the engineers in the world, in fact, don't work at Silicon Valley companies. They work outside of Silicon Valley. They work in these sort of more traditional companies. Like, if you look at the Fortune 500, for example, probably like 20 of them are software companies. There are 480 of them are not software companies. And actually, they employ those software engineers. And so most of the software engineers in the world and most of the code written in the world actually goes towards these internal facing applications. And so, like, for all the reasons you said there, like, I think hallucination matters less, for example, because you have someone checking the output. It's not like an end consumer, so hallucination is more okay. It's more acceptable as well. AI can be unreliable because it's probabilistic, and that's also okay. So I think it's kind of hard to imagine AI being adopted in a consumer way without the consumer like opting in. Like, ChatGPT is very obviously a consumer. The consumer is like, knows that it's ChatGPT. It's using it. I don't know if it's going to make its way to like the banking app anytime soon. Maybe for like, even for support, it's hard because if it hallucinates, then, it's actually quite bad for support if you're hallucinating, right? So it's hard to say. I'm not sure.
But that's a good idea. Like insight, I think a lot of people, like you said, we all build software. So we expect that everybody else is building software for other people, but most people just want to use the software that we build out here. Yeah. I think the last big bucket is like models breakdown. 80% of people you survey just use OpenAI. Some might experiment with smaller models. Any insights from your experience at Retool, like building some of the AI features? Have you guys thought about using open source models? Have you thought about fine-tuning models for specific use cases? Or have you just found GPT-4 to just be great at most tasks?
So two things. One is that from a data privacy perspective, people are getting more and more okay with using a hosted model, like a GPT-4, for example. Especially because GPT-4 or OpenAI often has to have enterprise agreements with some companies already, because I think a lot of CIOs are just like, let's get this thing in-house. Like, let's use it on Azure, for example, and, let's make it available for employees to experiment with. So I do think there is more acceptance, if you will, today of feed data into GPT. That's, I think, some sensitive data. People might not want to do so, like, feeding it like earnings results data, 3 days before you announce earnings, like, probably is a bad idea. Like, probably don't want GPT writing your like earnings statement for you. So, there's still some challenges like that I think actually open source models could actually help solve, like a Model 3, when it comes to, I think that could be exciting. So that's maybe just one thought. The second thought is, I think OpenAI has been really quite smart with sort of their pricing, and they've been pretty aggressive of like, let's create this model and sell it at a pretty cheap price, and to make it such that there's no reason for you to use any other model. Just from like a strategy perspective, I don't know if that's going to work. And the reason for that is you have really well-funded players like a Google or like a Facebook, for example, that are actually quite interested. Like, I think if OpenAI is competing with startups, OpenAI would win for sure. Like, at this point, OpenAI is so far ahead from both a model and a pricing perspective that like there's no reason for it to go use, really, I think, in my opinion at least, a startup model. But if Facebook is not going to give up on AI. Like, Facebook is investing a lot in AI, in fact. And so competing against a large FANG company that is making a model open source, I think that is challenging. Now, however, where we are right now is I think GPT-4 is so far in terms of performance and I would say model performance is so important right now because like the average, you can argue Llama 2 is actually so far behind, but like customers don't want to use Llama 2 because it's so far behind right now. And so that I think is part of the challenge. As AI progress slows down, so if we get like Llama 4, Llama 5, for example, maybe it's comparable at that point to like GPT-5 or GPT-6, like it may get to the point where most like, look, I just want to use Llama. Like it's safer for me to host it on-prem. It's just as fast, just as cheap. Like why not, basically? So, but I think right now we are in this state where OpenAI is executing really well, I think. And right now they're thriving, but let's see what happens in the next year or two. So.
Awesome, and there's a lot more numbers, but we're just gonna send people to the link in the show notes. Yeah, this was great, Sean. Any other thoughts, threads we wanna pull on while we have David?
What are you gonna ask differently for the next survey? Like what info do you really actually want to know that's gonna change your worldview?
I was going to ask you that, but if you have any ideas, let me know. For us, actually, we were planning on asking very similar questions because for us, the value of the survey is mostly seeing changes over time and understanding like, okay, wow, like let's like, for example, GPT-4 Turbo NPS has declined, that would be interesting actually. One thing that was actually pretty shocking to us is, let me find the exact number, but like, if you look at like the one change that we saw, for example, was like if you compare GPT 3.5 NPS, I want to say it was like 14 or something, like it was like not high actually. But the GPT-4 NPS thing was like 45 or something like that. So it was actually quite a bit higher. So I think that kind of progress over time is what we're most interested in seeing is, our model's getting worse, model's getting better. Are people still loving PG Vector? Do people still love Mongo? Stuff like that. That I think is the most interesting thing. So do you two have any questions that you think we should ask?
Off the bat, like it seems like you're very language model focused. I think that there's an increasing interest in multimodality in AI, and I don't really know how that is going to manifest. Obviously, GPT-4 Vision as well as Gemini both have multimodal capabilities. There's a smaller subset of open source models that have multimodal features as well. Like we just released an episode today talking about Idafix from Hugging Face, and so I think I would like to understand how people are adopting or adapting to the different modalities that are now coming online for them. What their demand is relative to for like, let's say, generative images versus like just visual comprehension versus audio versus text to speech. Like what do they want? What do they need? And what's the sort of stack ranked preference order?
That's a great idea. We'll ask that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder what it is. I don't know. Yeah.
It's something that we're trying to actively understand because there's this sort of multimodality war, but really like multimodality is like an umbrella term for like actually a whole bunch of different things that are like, quite honestly, like not really that related to each other unless in the limit, which it tends towards like maybe everything uses transformers and ultimately everything can be merged together with a text layer because text is the universal interface. But if you're given the choice between like if I want to implement an audio feature versus I want to implement an image feature versus video, whatever, what are people needing the most? What should we pay the most attention to? What is going to be the biggest market for builders to build in? I don't know.
Yeah, we'll go ask that. Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
I think, Sean, you put in a question from Joseph here in the show notes. Our friend Joseph Nelson, founder of RoboFlow and Office co-worker, I guess.
Yeah, sure. So, I think I figure we'll just kind of zoom out a little bit to just the general founder questions. You have a lot of fans, in the founder community. And I think you're just generally well known as a very sort of, straightforward, plain-spoken, person about just business. Something that is the perception from Joseph is that you have, been notably sort of sales-led, in the past. That's his perception. I actually never got that, but I'm not that close to sort of your sales motion. And it's interesting to understand your market, like the internal tooling market, versus all the competition that's out there, right? There's a bunch of open source retools, and there's a bunch of I don't know how you sort of categorize the various things out there. But effectively, what he's seeing and what he's asking is, how do you manage between sort of enterprise versus ubiquity, or in other words, enterprise versus bottom up, right? I was actually surprised when he told me to ask that question, because I had always assumed that you were self-serve sign up, like bottom up led. But it seems like you have a counter consensus view on that.
Yeah, let me think about that for a second. Yeah, so actually when Retool first started, we started mostly by doing sales, actually. And the reason we started by doing sales was mostly because we weren't sure whether we had product market fit, and sales seemed to be the best way of proving whether we had product market fit out. Because I think this is true of a lot of AI projects. You can launch a project and people might use it a bit and people might stop using it, and you're like, well, I don't know, is that product market fit? Is that not? It's hard to say, actually. However, if you work very closely with the customer in sort of a sales-led way, it's easier to understand, their sort of requests, understand their needs and stuff, and then actually go build a product that actually serves them really well. And so basically we viewed sales as like working with customers, basically, which is like, I think actually I think it's a better way to describe it, what sales is at an early stage company. And so we did a lot of that, certainly when we got started. I think we, over the last maybe 5 years, maybe like 3 years ago, 4 years, or something like that, I think we have invested more on the self-serve ubiquity side. And the reason for that is when we started Retool, we always wanted actually some percent of software to get built inside of Retool. Whether AI software or just software more broadly, UIs, whatever, but like software, basically. And for us, we think that maybe one day, 10% of all the code in the world could be written inside of Retool, actually, or 10% of the software could be running on Retool, which would be really, really cool. And for us to achieve that vision, it really does require like broad-based adoption of the platform. It can't just be like only like 1,000 customers, but the largest 1,000 companies in the world use it. It has to be like all the developers in the world use it. And for us, there's I think 25, 30 million developers in the world. This, of course, is how do you, get to all the developers. And the only way to get to those developers is not by sales. You can't have a salesperson talk to 30 million people. It has to be basically in this sort of bottoms-up, product-led, ubiquity kind of way, basically. And so for us, we actually changed our focus to be ubiquity actually last year. So our North Star metric used to always be sort of revenue generated or net new ARR generated. We actually changed it to be number of developers building on the platform actually last year. And that I think was actually a really clarifying change because obviously revenue was important, it funds, a lot of, our product and funds, the business. But we're going to fail if we aren't able to get to something like 10, 20, 30 million developers one day. If we can't convince all developers that Retool is a better way of building a sort of class of software, let's say internal applications for today. And so I think that has been a pretty good outcome. If I think about, the last 5 years of Retool, I think the starting off with sales so you can build revenue and then you can actually build traction and you can hire more slowly, I think was really good. I do think the focus towards bottoms up ubiquity also is really important because it helps us get to our long-term outcome. What's interesting, I think, is that long-term ubiquity actually is harder for us to achieve outside of Silicon Valley. To your point, I think in Silicon Valley, Retool is reasonably ubiquitous. I think if you're starting a startup today and you're looking to build a internal UI, you're probably going to consider Retool at least. Maybe you don't choose it because you're hey, I'm not ready for it yet or something, but you're going to consider it at least. And when you want to build it, I think it's actually a high probability you will actually end up choosing Retool. It's awesome. But it's that, if you think about it, a random developer working at, let's say, like an Amazon, for example, we actually, today at Amazon, actually, we have, I think, 11 separate business units that use Retool at this point, which is really awesome. So Amazon's actually a big Retool customer. But like the average engineer at Amazon probably has never heard of Retool, actually. And so that is where the challenge really is how do we get like, I don't know, let's say 10,000 developers at Amazon building via Retool. And that, again, I think is still a bottom of the ubiquity thing. I don't think that's like I don't think we can like, go to Amazon and knock on every developer's door or send out an email to every developer and be like, go use Retool. They're going to ignore us, actually. I think it has to be, use the product, and you love it, you tell your coworker about it. And so for us, I think bottoms up ubiquity, but marrying that with sort of enterprise or the community business has been something that's really near and dear to our hearts. So.
Yeah, just like general market thoughts on AI. Are you, do you spend a lot of time thinking about like AGI stuff or regulation or safety, or like what interests you most, outside of the Retool context?
Wow. Well, given what I said, Retool context, we'll go to your actual question. Yeah, in my opinion, I think there's a lot of hype in AI right now, and there's, again, not so many use cases. So for us, at least from a Retool context, it really is, how do we bring AI and have it actually meet business problems? And again, it's actually pretty hard. Like, I think most founders that I meet in the AI space are always looking for use cases. They never have enough use cases, sort of real use cases people will pay money for. So that's, I think, really where the Retool interest comes from. Me personally, I think philosophically, I've been thinking recently myself a bit about sort of intentionality and AGI and like, what would it take for me to say, yes, GPTX or, any sort of model actually is AGI? I think it's kind of challenging because it's like, I think if you look at like evolution, for example, like humans have been programmed, to do like three things, if you will. Like, we are here to survive, we're here to reproduce, and we're here to like, maybe those are just two things, I suppose. So like it's basically to survive, you have to go eat food, for example. To survive, maybe like having more resources helps you want to go make money, for example. To reproduce, maybe you should go date, or whatever, you get married and stuff like that, right? So like we've been programmed to do that, and humans that are good at that, have propagated. And so humans that, were not interested in surviving probably have disappeared, or just due to natural selection. Humans that were not interested in reproducing also disappeared because, or, there are less of them, you could say, because they just stopped carrying on, basically. And so it almost feels like humans have been sort of naturally self-selected for these like two aims. I think the third aim I was thinking about was like, does it matter to be happy? Like maybe it does. So maybe like happier humans, survival, it's hard to say. So I'm not sure. But if you think about that in the relative to like AIs, if you will, like right now we're not really selecting AIs for like reproduction. Like it's not like we're being like, hey AI, you should go make 30 other AIs, and those that make the most AIs are the ones that survive. We're not saying that. So it is kind of interesting, sort of thinking about where intentionality for humans come from. And like I think you can argue that intentionality for humans basically comes out of these three things. Like if you want to be happy, you want to survive, you want to reproduce. That's like basically your sort of goal, in life. Whereas like the AI doesn't really have that. But maybe you could program it in. Like if you, prompt inject, for example, like, hey, AI, you just, go do these things. And, you can even create a simulation, if you will, like all these AIs, in a world, for example. And maybe you'd have AGI in that world, which I think is kind of interesting. So that's kind of stuff I've been thinking of when I talk about with some of my friends from a sort of philosophical perspective. But yeah, it's kind of interesting.
My quick response to that is we're kind of doing that, maybe not at the sort of trained final model level, but at least at the data sets level, there's a lot of knowledge being transferred from model to model. And if you want to think about that sort of evolutionary selection pressure, it is happening in there. And, I guess one of the early concerns about being in Sydney and sort of like self-bootstrapping AGI is that it actually is if these models are sentient, it actually is in their incentive to get as much of their data out there into our data sets so that they can bootstrap themselves in the next version that gets trained. And that is a scary, sobering thought that we need to try to be on top of.
David, I know we're both fan of Hofstadter's GB. And actually saw in one of your posts on the Sequoia blog, you referred to the anteater like piece of I don't even know if you call them chapters in GB. It's just kind of like this continuous riff. But basically, like how ants are like not intelligence, but like an ant colony has signs of intelligence. And I think Hofstadter then used that to say, hey, you know, neurons are kind of like similar, and then computers maybe will be the same. I've always been curious if like we're drawing the wrong conclusion for like neural networks, where people are like, oh, each weight is like a neuron, and then you tie them together should be like a brain. But maybe like the neuron is like different models that then get tied together to make the brain. You know, we're kind of looking at the wrong level of abstraction. Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting philosophical discussions to have. And Sean and I recorded a monthly recap podcast yesterday, and we had a similar discussion on, are we using the wrong? Are we like, what did you say, Sean, on the plane and the bird? I think that was a good analogy.
This our lesson. Are we using the wrong analogies? Because we're trying to be inspired by human evolution and human development, and we are trying to apply that analogy strictly to machines. But in every example in history, machines have always evolved differently than humans. So why should we expect AI to be any different?
Yeah, if you sort of peer under the hood of AGI, if you insist that AGI, we have only used AGI for things like a human, and that is the Turing test, I suppose. But whether that is a good point, like if it works, no, that's not the Turing test. The Turing test basically is if the output is the same as a human, then I'm happy, basically. I don't really care about what's going on inside. And so it feels like caring about the inside is like a pretty high bar. Like, why do you care? It's kind of like the plane thing. Like, if it flies, it's not a bird. I agree. It does not fly necessarily the same way as a bird physically it does, I suppose. But you see what I mean? Like, it's not the same under the hood, but it's okay because it flies. That's what I care about. And it does seem to be like AGI is probably like, does it think and can it achieve like, outcomes that I give it, and can it achieve its own outcomes? And if it can do that, like, I kind of don't care what it is like under the hood. It may not need to be human-like at all. It doesn't matter to me. So I agree.
Awesome. No, we kept too long. I actually have GB right here on my bookshelf. Sometimes I pick it up and I'm like, man, I can't believe I got through it once. It's quite the piece of work. But that's what happened. So. Yeah. No, I mean, I started studying physics in undergrad, so it's one of the edgy things that every physicist starts going through. But thank you so much for your time, David. This was a lot of fun, and looking forward to the 2024 State of AI results to see how things change.
Yeah, I'll let you know. So thanks both.